Who did you bring home? I never questioned the silence of the streets at night. I never noticed how the shadows stretched unnaturally long under the streetlights or how the air turned thick the closer I got to home. That night, however, something changed. I had worked late. Again. My wife, Anna, hated it, but she never said much. Just that tight-lipped expression when I came through the door, that glance at the clock. It was past midnight when I turned onto our street, the houses all dark, the only sound the crunch of gravel under my shoes. The air felt heavier than usual, damp and metallic, like the breath of something watching. I didn't hurry, though. I never hurried. The front door creaked as I stepped in. The hallway was dim, the only light spilling in from the kitchen. Anna stood in the doorway, her nightgown pooling around her feet. She wasn't scowling. She wasn't even blinking. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted, and then she whispered, "Who did you bring home?" I frowned. What? Her hands clenched into fists. She took a step back, her eyes locked on something behind me. Her voice wavered, barely audible, but it hit me like a sledgehammer. "He's standing right behind you." A laugh nearly bubbled out of me. Nearly. My body wanted to chuckle, to wave it off, but my gut had turned to ice. The house was locked. I had been alone. I knew I had been alone. But the way she said it, like she wasn't even talking to me anymore. I turned my head. Just a glance. The hallway behind me was empty. "There's no one here," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. Anna shook her head, a violent little jerk, her pupils blown wide. "Don't turn your back." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't you dare turn your back on it." A joke. A nightmare. Maybe she was half asleep. Maybe I was. But my skin crawled as if something was breathing against my neck. I took a step forward, reaching for her. She flinched. Actually flinched. Like I wasn't me anymore. That's when the smell hit me. Rot. Damp, decayed wood. That thick, putrid scent of something old and wrong, like an attic that had been sealed shut for 100 years. My stomach lurched, and I had to swallow the bile rising in my throat. "Anna, what?" The lights flickered. Not the usual, lazy dimming of old bulbs. No. A violent, stuttering blink, like something pressing too hard on the walls, on the wires, on the very air itself. A pressure, a hum that settled into my bones. Then, the whispering started. Not Anna. Not me. A low, guttural murmur, threading through the house like breath slipping through teeth. I took a step back, and the floorboards groaned under my weight. Then another step. And the whispering stopped. A silence so sharp it rang in my ears. Anna's lips trembled. "It's inside." The light surged back, too bright, too white, making my vision blur for a second. When I blinked, she was gone. The hallway was empty. The kitchen light still burned, the room beyond looking as if no one had ever stood there at all. I called her name. No answer. A single sound drifted from upstairs. The creak of our bedroom door opening. And that was when I realized. I had never heard her footsteps. Not once. I stood frozen, my breath sharp in my chest, the sound of my own heartbeat pressing against my skull like a war drum. The house had fallen into an unnatural stillness, the kind that thickened the air, stretching every second into something unbearable. I forced myself to move, but my legs felt sluggish, as if the weight of the silence itself was dragging me down. My mind screamed for logic, exhaustion, stress, a trick of the light, but my gut churned with something more primal, something older than reason. Anna had vanished. The kitchen, the hallway, the very air itself felt stripped of her presence, like she had never been there to begin with. But I had seen her. I had seen her eyes wide with terror, her lips forming words that no sane person should have to say. The weight of her fear still clung to me, crawling under my skin, burrowing deep like something venomous. And then there was that other thing, the whispering, the flickering lights, the rancid scent that still coated my tongue like spoiled meat. But the worst part? That bedroom door. It had creaked open all on its own. I wasn't a man easily scared. I had walked through dark alleyways, stood in empty parking garages at night, heard the distant rustle of footsteps that didn't belong. But this was different. This was my home, my sanctuary, and yet something foreign had seeped into it, something wrong. My fingers curled into fists, knuckles white as I forced myself up the stairs, each step slow, deliberate, as if I was walking towards something that was waiting for me. The wood groaned beneath me, the old house suddenly feeling much older, much frilier, as if it, too, had been caught in something's grip. My shadow stretched before me in the dim light, a long, twisting thing that flickered unnaturally with every hesitant step. The smell thickened, clawing at my throat, but I swallowed hard and pushed forward. When I reached the top, the door to our bedroom stood slightly ajar. It had been closed when I left. I told myself to turn on the hall light, to flood the space with something normal, something human, but my hand wouldn't move. Something deep inside me, some buried instinct, whispered that light wouldn't help. That whatever was in there, whatever had been standing behind me, didn't care about such things. The door creaked as I pushed it open. The room was dark, the kind of blackness that swallowed the shape of things, where familiar objects lost their meaning, where the mind filled in the gaps with nightmares. I could barely make out the bed, the dresser, the outline of the curtains shuddering slightly as if something had disturbed them. And then I saw it. Not a shape. Not a figure. A void. A thing that wasn't there but somehow was, a hollow in the air, a distortion of space itself, like a smudge on reality. It stood near the window, its edges shifting, bleeding into the darkness, and I felt my stomach drop into some bottomless pit of cold recognition. Anna had seen it. She hadn't been speaking to me. She had been warning me. The void shifted, and the walls groaned, the wood crying out like something immense was pressing down on it. I felt it then, the pressure, the thickening of air around me, a sensation like hands gripping my shoulders, like fingers brushing the back of my neck. My breath hitched, my lungs seizing, and for one horrifying second, I understood why she had told me not to turn my back. It was closer now. The darkness itself was breathing. I don't remember moving, but I must have. My feet stumbled back, my spine slamming into the doorframe, a noise escaping my throat that didn't sound like me. The thing didn't lunge. It didn't chase. It only stood there, watching, or maybe not watching, because how could something that had no eyes see? And then, just as suddenly as it had come, it was gone. Not vanished. Not faded. Just, no longer there. The air lightened. The room settled. The world tilted back into something almost normal, except for one thing. The bed was empty. Anna's side was cold. The sheets untouched. And I knew, with a kind of certainty that made my ribs ache, that my wife had never been here at all. The house wasn't empty. I knew that now. Something else was here, something that had slipped in unnoticed, hidden in the quiet spaces between my thoughts, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. My hands were shaking, though I told myself they weren't. The logical part of my brain fought to make sense of it, sleep deprivation, stress, some kind of waking nightmare, but the deeper, older part of me, the one that still remembered the stories my grandmother used to tell in hushed whispers, knew the truth. Anna wasn't here. The memory of her face, her voice, the sheer terror in her eyes, it had felt real, more real than anything else in this suffocating night. And yet, when I reached for her side of the bed, the sheets were smooth, untouched, as if she had never climbed under them at all. My stomach clenched with something icy and sharp. The smell had faded, the air settling into an artificial stillness, but I could still feel it, that oppressive wrongness pressing against my skin, coiling around my ribs like something waiting to tighten its grip. I needed to move. Staying here, in this room that no longer felt like mine, would drive me insane. The hallway stretched before me, yawning open like the throat of something vast and hungry. The light flickered again, just once, a sickly pulse of yellow, before steadying. I forced myself forward, every step feeling like it carried more weight than it should, like something unseen was dragging at my ankles, trying to hold me back. I reached the living room and hesitated. The front door stood exactly as I had left it, locked, bolted, untouched. No signs of forced entry, no footprints on the welcome mat, nothing to suggest that anyone, or anything, had come in after me. And yet, the sensation of being watched, of not being alone, gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. The silence was unbearable. I reached for my phone, half expecting the screen to be dead, but it lit up immediately. 3 a.m. A single missed call. Anna. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. My fingers were clumsy, stiff with cold or fear, I couldn't tell which, as I tapped the screen, the call log opening with a small, meaningless chime. The call had come in at 12:47. I had been in the house by then. I had been speaking to her. Hadn't I? The ringing in my ears grew louder, drowning out rational thought, filling my head with a buzzing static that made it hard to breathe. I tapped her name, brought the phone to my ear, heart hammering against my ribs as the dial tone stretched on. And then, click. Silence. A crackle, faint, distant, like the sound of wind rushing through a phone held too far from a mouth. My own breath came shallow and ragged as I strained to hear, my fingers gripping the device so tightly that the edges of the case dug into my skin. Then, a whisper. Not words. Not a voice. Just breathing. Slow, measured, deliberate. Not Anna's. I ended the call with shaking hands, my pulse a violent, erratic thing in my throat. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. My body felt disconnected, sluggish, like I was trapped in a dream where movement was impossible. The phone slipped from my fingers, landing on the wooden floor with a dull thud. I needed to get out. The front door was right there, just a few feet away. All I had to do was unbolt it, step outside, fill my lungs with fresh air, shake off whatever nightmare had wrapped itself around me. My feet moved before I could think, and for the first time that night, I felt a sliver of relief, until I reached for the lock. My fingers brushed against the metal, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Not a gradual chill. A sudden, violent drop, like stepping into a frozen lake, the breath ripped from my lungs in an instant. My skin prickled, a sharp, burning cold spreading through my fingertips as if the very air had turned to ice. Then, a voice. Right behind me. Soft. Almost familiar. Don't. I spun around, my pulse slamming into my ribs so hard it hurt. The room was empty. But the door was unlocked. And it had been locked just seconds ago. The blood in my veins turned to ice. The whisper hadn't come from inside the house. It had come from behind the door. From outside. I didn't move. The cold pressed into me, sinking beneath my skin, curling around my spine like a living thing. My fingers remained frozen on the door handle, the weight of the moment suffocating. My breath came in short, shallow gasps, fogging the air in front of me. Outside, beyond the door, the night stretched endlessly, thick with a silence that felt heavier than it should. Every instinct screamed at me to open it, to step out into the darkness and put distance between myself and whatever had rooted itself inside my home. But that whisper, low, warning, deliberate, hadn't been a plea. It had been a command. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my pulse hammering erratically in my ears. Slowly, cautiously, I released the door handle and took a step back. The air behind me remained cold, heavy with something unseen. The house, my house, no longer felt like a place of safety. It felt occupied. Inhabited by something I couldn't name. The floorboards creaked behind me. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A soft, deliberate shift in the wood, like the weight of something unseen adjusting, just enough to be noticed. My stomach lurched, my muscles tensing instinctively. I turned my head slowly, afraid of what I might see, afraid of confirming the presence that I could already feel. But there was nothing. The living room stood empty, its familiar shadows stretching long and still in the dim glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. My jacket was draped over the arm of the couch exactly where I had left it. The coffee table held the same scattered mail, the same half-empty glass of water from the night before. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I was not alone. I knew it with a certainty that burned in my gut, a deep, primal understanding that refused to be reasoned away. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing into my back, the oppressive stillness of something waiting. Watching. The floor creaked again. Closer this time. I backed away, my steps slow, measured, careful not to turn too quickly, not to give whatever was there the satisfaction of seeing my fear. My breath hitched as I reached the staircase, the open space of the hallway yawning behind me like a dark mouth. The upstairs was worse. I knew that without question. The air was heavier there, thick with a presence that had been waiting long before I had stepped through the door tonight. But I had nowhere else to go. I forced my legs to move, climbing the stairs one at a time, my fingers brushing the wall for balance. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that wasn't natural, wasn't empty, but rather filled with the weight of something unseen, lurking just out of sight. Each step sent a fresh wave of unease rolling through me, the rawness of it settling deep in my bones. When I reached the top, I hesitated. The hallway stretched before me, dark and endless, the doors to the bedrooms standing slightly ajar, as though something had passed through them just moments before. My own room, the sanctuary I had fled from not long ago, loomed at the end of the hall. The door was open now. It hadn't been when I left. The weight in my chest tightened, my breath coming too fast, too shallow. The darkness beyond the threshold felt unnatural, deeper than it should have been. My mind raced through the possibilities, an intruder, a trick of the light, exhaustion playing cruel tricks, but none of them fit. Then, from the depths of the darkened room, came a sound. Breathing. Slow. Measured. Just like before. But this time, it wasn't on the phone. It was here. In the house. In my room. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't. The cold spread through my body, my heart pounded murderously in my chest, as if trying to fight its way out. In the darkness that hid behind the threshold of my room, something was breathing. Calmly, evenly, the way no living thing could breathe, no one who felt fear, pain, or fatigue. It wasn't human breathing. I took a step back. The floor beneath my feet seemed fragile, almost ghostly, as if it were about to crumble under my weight. The only thought pulsating in my head was to get out. Out of this house. Out of this damned corridor. Out of this life? Something rustled from the darkness. Quietly, as if air slid along a tree, as if something big, cautiously moved, trying not to give itself away. But I already knew. I knew that it could see me. I took another step back. My wife, standing a few feet away, had a look of terror in her eyes that seemed more than fear, as if she had already understood something I had yet to grasp. "Don't look," she whispered. But I was already looking. The darkness in the room stirred. It didn't disperse, it didn't melt, it didn't dissolve into the twilight. It changed. It thickened. It began to take shape. I could see only outlines. Tall. Too tall for a human. Something bowed its head, recognizing me as I recognized it. I didn't need details. I knew who it was. Who I had brought home. With every breath it drew closer. But I wasn't running away anymore. Now I remembered. All those little things, all the insignificant moments that I had seemingly forgotten. That I was never alone. Not that night. Not any night before. Something reached out to me. And the light went out.